Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Corey Yoder of Coriander Quilts, and today I am sharing a Cozy Up Fabrics trunk show. Cozy Up Fabrics came out last fall into quilt shops, and you can still snag them right now. So I thought I need to get this trunk show up soon so that if you want to grab any of these fabrics, you can get them into your studio before they're no longer available. This is a fun fall colored line, and it is full of little checks and clovers, and I don't know. I had a lot of fun designing this fabric line, and I'm excited to show these quilts to you. Maybe a week or so ago, I mentioned that I was trying to do some trunk shows for some previous lines and had you all vote on which, well, not vote, I had you all leave comments about which trunk shows you might be interested in seeing. So today, I'm gonna list a couple, and I want you to vote on which one you would like to see next. I have some that I think would be great to share right now based on what you guys said. So I'm going to give you a couple choices and help me narrow it down to which one you would want to see next. So Hollyberry, my Christmas line of fabric. I would be interested in sharing a trunk show on that line with you guys. And then I also had a lot of people mention that they would like to see line mixing quilts. So quilts where I have used more than one line of fabric. So between those two, Hollyberry or scrappy mixed quilts, which of those two would you like to see next? Leave me a comment and let me know. And if you have been enjoying these videos, the trunk shows, the tutorials, wherever you may have stumbled onto my channel from, I would love to have you as a subscriber. And as always, I love the comments that I get below. It's always so much fun chatting with you. So let's go ahead and move on to the trunk show part of today's video. This first quilt I have to share with you is called Roadside Harvest, and it's full of those cute little trucks and pumpkins and leaves. And this was also the boxed kit for this collection. You may still be able to get this as a kit in your quilt shops right now. So if this is something you would like to make, see if you can grab that kit, because those boxed kits are always so cute. This quilt is a fat eighth friendly quilt. So fat eighths are the 9" by 22" pieces of fabric. And it uses also a little bit of yardage. It's gonna finish at 72 by 80. And as always, when I do trunk shows, I like to show you guys the quilts up close so that you can see the quilting, see the binding, see the backing. And I'm also gonna talk about that checked fabric a little bit more, because I know that patterns like what is on that fabric, checks, plaids, stripes, those sorts of prints in quilt making can be a little bit tricky. So I'm gonna spend a little bit more time at the end of this video talking even more about that. But let's get that quilt down so that I can show you some more of the details. And here is this quilt up close. You can see those cute little trucks. I used the dark gray text print for the tire fabric, which I think is so cute. They're little tires, but that text print is a nice small scale. The green pin dot for the grass, and my quilter, Kayleen Perry, I'll link to her information below, used the Quilting Design Modern Loops for the quilting on this one. The backing is the clover print from Cozy Up, and then the binding is the gray pin dot, which works really well for binding. Let me slide this up so you can look at the leaf part of this quilt, because those are such cute little leaves there. Keep sliding. All right, so there's the leaf row. So it's the trucks, the pumpkins, and then the leaves. And like I said, I wanted to talk a little bit about this check fabric, and I'm going to go into more detail at the end as to how to straighten up check fabrics like this in your, what am I trying to say? How to straighten up check fabric before you start piecing it into your quilt. I've used this check a number of times. Cozy Up was the first time that I brought this check fabric into a line, and I've used it again in Sunwashed, which comes out in early 2023, and I may have snuck it into another line that we can't talk about just yet. But I know that sometimes it can be a little bit intimidating working with a check fabric like this. You don't want those checks running in strange directions, so I do like to straighten my checks up before I piece them into any projects. So I'll talk about that at the end of the video. So if that's something that you've been wondering about, be sure to stick around and catch that. So that is the Roadside Harvest quilt. Now, back behind me, we have Everlasting. Let me grab this pattern. This is a fat quarter bundle. It uses 20 fat quarters, and it's just this all over star design with sort of a checkerboard background. That Moda Bella solid that I used for the background is, well, of course, the 200, which is my white solid that I like to use with all of my fabric lines. Moda Bella solid in 200 is the color you want there. But this light aqua color is called Hometown Sky, and it isn't an exact match to the dark teal color that's in Cozy Up because I needed a little bit more contrast than what I would have if I had used the exact match. So a few shades lighter is Hometown Sky, and so it still allows for great contrast in those blocks, but it just adds a little bit of interest to that background. So, and this quilt finishes at 74 by 92. Let's take this down and look at the quilting on it as well. And here is what this quilt looks like up close. It's quilted with an all over orange peel design. I always love an orange peel on a quilt. I think they look so pretty. And for the backing, I used this large scale teal floral, and the binding is that same gray pin dot that I used in the previous quilt. And I think that just came together beautifully. I really enjoyed working with these fabrics. I just finished my Moda Blockheads quilts with Cozy Up. I'll show you that one in a little bit. I know many of you have seen it, but these fabrics are so fun for this time of year. All right, moving on to the next quilt. This quilt is called Acorns. Let me pull this pattern so I can give you all the information on it. It is a charm pack quilt, and it is a big charm pack quilt. It finishes at 70 by 82, and you would need 2 charm packs for all of those little cute acorns, and then you do need just a little bit of a contrasting print, and then your background and border fabrics. But I think it turned out so cute, and we'll take a look at this one up close as well. Here is Acorns up close. This was quilted with about 1.5 inch crosshatch across the whole thing. And I am often also drawn to crosshatch quilting, whether it's diagonal like what you see here or a horizontal and vertical crosshatch. I think it's a nice simple way to finish off your quilt, and I think they always turn out so cute. The backing is actually the same as the border, that green clover print, and then that gray pin dot. That gray pin dot fabric got a workout on my bindings for this line. It's such a nice way to frame out the quilts. So Acorns, and then we will move on to, well, we've got the acorns, so now we need the leaves. So this is my leaves quilt hanging behind me. I'll grab my pattern and then I'll step to the side. So leaves is a fat 8th quilt. You need 34 fat 8s. It finishes at 66 by 76. And this one is a lot of fun to piece. It looks a lot trickier to piece than what it actually is. There are no strange shaped pieces in here. It's all techniques that you're familiar with using if you've been piecing for any length of time. It's a really neat way to piece it together, and it comes together wonderfully. I will pop this one down and we'll talk about this quilting too. And the leaves quilt up close. Now the background on this quilt is the white on white pin dot, which I released with Cozy Up. It has since been re-released in my Coriander Seeds line of fabrics. So you can once again get this adorable little pin dot fabric. It works so well in so many different backgrounds. The scale on it is really nice, even for small piecing. So that's a really versatile print. The backing is the clovers on white, and the binding is the green pin dot, which is such a nice contrast against that larger scale dark floral there in the border. And the quilting design is a Baptist fan. This is another one that I go to often. I just think it looks so pretty on so many different quilt designs. So a Baptist fan for the quilting on this one. Before I move on to sharing about the quilt behind me, I want to talk about a quilt that I no longer have. I gave away my pumpkin festival quilt, so I don't have this one anymore to show you the quilt itself, but I did want to talk about the quilt just a little bit. It is a jelly roll friendly quilt. It finishes at 72 by 92, and it's just full of pumpkins, as you can see. I used the orange pin dot fabric for those pumpkins, and then it's just framed out with all of the pretty prints in the Cozy Up line from the jelly roll that you use. So didn't want you to forget about Pumpkin Festival just because I don't have that quilt anymore. So that's a fun jelly roll quilt. And now we will move on to Autumnal. This is actually a free quilt that I designed to go with this line. I do like designing free quilt patterns with my lines pretty frequently. You will find that I have just like an easy one-page PDF quilt pattern that you can make with my line. So I will link to this pattern. It's called Autumnal. It uses the checked fabrics. And like I said, stay tuned for that straightening up little mini tutorial at the end of the video. So it uses the check fabric and then the gray pin dot and the clover fabric for the borders. I'll pull that down. The quilting on this one is really cool. It was the first time that I used this quilting design on a quilt, and I think it's a neat one. So let's take a look at it. Here is the autumnal quilt up close, and you can see this fun quilting. So this is called Mid-Mod Orange Peel. And I mentioned that I liked an orange peel, so when I saw this one, it's just a little bit of a boxier shape than a traditional orange peel. I thought, I want to try that one out, and I think it's really a cute, fun one. A little bit more of a modern design probably than the traditional orange peel. This quilt also, I didn't mention the size on it, is 66 by 82, and I will have the link to the PDF pattern listed below in the description box if you want to grab this one. So the backing on this is actually, let me see if I can show you. Yeah, there we go. I just used some larger pieces of fabric that I had left over. So a pieced backing on this one. Typically I would want to grab a 108 so I don't have to do any piecing on my backing, but this was just a little bit that I had on hand. And no binding as of yet. One thing that I've been wanting to try is fussy cutting the check fabric and using it for a binding. It's going to be a little bit fussy to do, but I think it could make a really cool binding. So this would be a great quilt to try that out on. I might just need to do that because I think that would be really neat. I'm going to have to add this to my works in progress video along with all of the other bindingless quilts that you all see when I share those videos. But that is the autumnal quilt. A super fun one to piece. It's really simple. These pumpkin blocks are nice and big, and once you straighten up that fabric, those are such fun blocks to make. Now, this quilt behind me, I shared in a recent video. So I do want to briefly mention it here just because it is a Cozy Up quilt. But if you want to see the quilting design or the backing or the binding up close, I am going to link to that video in the description box. It is called the Feeling Leafy quilt, and it is a layer cake quilt from the Snuggle Up book. This is a Moda All-Stars book compiled by Lisa Alexander. So this is not available as an individual quilt pattern like the ones that you just saw previously, but rather it is included in this book. It's a layer cake quilt, and let me just see what size it finishes at. It's a really nice throw size, lap size quilt, and there it is. It is going to finish at, get to the right page, 63 inches square. And you would just need the layer cake plus a little bit of background fabric to complete this quilt. So a super fun one to piece. The other quilt that I'm just gonna hold up for you because I've talked about this one recently is my most recent Moda Blockheads finish. And I used Cozy Up for this quilt too. So many of you have already seen this quilt, but if you are new here, this is the Moda Blockheads quilt that I just finished using Cozy Up. And this was a really fun one to piece this time of year. So just a quick peek at this one since I've talked about this one pretty recently. I will link to the Moda Blockheads block information for round 4, the round that just finished below, so that if you want to make a fun quilt yourself, you certainly could. All right, let us go ahead and move into that information that I was talking about for the check fabric. You saw that we had Autumnal. That quilt had all of those pumpkins with the checked fabric. And then of course, Roadside Harvest had all of the pumpkins too. So this is Autumnal again. And I'm going to show you how I would go about straightening up the checked fabrics so that you have a nice straight starting point when you are cutting out your checked fabrics. All right, so I have picked up just a little scrap piece of that corally orange check fabric from Cozy Up. I think this is probably a fat eighth scrap, if I had to say. And I'm just going to pretend that I want to cut out a square from this fabric. Now, when you look at the bottom here, you can see that it's all crookedy and it is not running very straight. So I like to just straighten this up with my ruler and my rotary cutter. And sometimes you can get these pretty straight and sometimes they might be just not quite as straight, but we want it to be as straight as we can get it. When you purchase fabric off the bolt from a quilt shop, sometimes it may not have been cut exactly straight, or maybe you have starched something out of straightness. That can happen too. There are different reasons why you might have something. Sometimes it's just not printed quite straight. So there's different reasons why you might have a piece of fabric that you want to straighten up before you start using it. Now you've probably heard of like ripping or tearing to find the straight of grain, which that will find the straight grain of your fabric, but it doesn't always make your print run straight. So I like to just trim with my ruler and my rotary cutter and get things as straight as I can. So I'm just sort of lining everything up here. I'm choosing this line right here, so I'm not going to need to trim too much, and I'll just kind of, budge everything into place as best I can. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect. And certainly once a quilt is washed and dried, like anything that doesn't seem quite as straight quickly becomes much less noticeable, but I do like to straighten it up as much as I can. So I might do something like this. Now you can see over here right along the selvage edge, this isn't exactly straight right here, but really I would be trimming off a portion of this anyway, so I'm not as concerned about this little section over here, and I would trim right here. And that is going to give me a pretty nice starting point. And then if I know that I want a square, it's really nice to cut out squares individually. So I might just grab a square ruler, depending on what size I need. I might choose even exactly the size square that I need. And then I can place this exactly where I want it. So of course I wouldn't cut in the middle. I'd come over here to the side. This line seems to be running pretty nice and straight. You can see on my cutting mat here that it's running pretty straight. So I might choose that little guy right there. And then I can see how everything lays around the edge of my square. And I can see that the checks are running pretty straight. So I would feel pretty happy if I was cutting a 6.5 inch square just to cut this out right here. And I tend to cut out in smaller chunks like this as opposed to trying to cut big long strips at a time. It's just easier to keep everything accurate in smaller chunks like that rather than trying to strip cut and then go into smaller units. So that's how I would approach cutting this down. Straighten up the bottom. And then if you have a nice straight side and you can just trim your side down, you could certainly do that if you wanted to. And then I would just cut, like I said, I'd be real happy with that square right here. And I would just cut that out. So I do approach cutting checks a little bit differently. I usually would like to cut long strips and then subcut if I'm cutting a lot of squares rather than just one at a time. But I love the accuracy that cutting just one square at a time provides. So that's usually what I do with checked fabric. So I hope you find that helpful. It's a little bit of a different way to cut fabrics maybe than what you're used to, but in my opinion, it's worth taking that extra time just to straighten everything up, to have everything running as nicely and neatly as you can. So So I hope you've enjoyed this Cozy Up trunk show. Thank you so much for stopping by. Be sure to let me know if you wanted to see Hollyberry trunk show at some point soon, or maybe a mixed line, scrappier kind of trunk show. You guys all have a great day, and I will catch you next time.